Not exactly sure when, but there are times when I start contemplating what really makes me, I guess, myself and how something is perceived as an oddity.
And then the people at the kindergarten asked him to stop teaching him Tamil because he was confusing all the other kids at the kindergarten. And so they just stopped speaking it entirely for a few years. And so I never learned it.
Hard finding a specific place here, you know, because it's like you want to keep your ties like where you're from, but you also like want to immerse yourself in this one.
I think of myself as pretty unique in the fact that I'm Cambodian. I'm from that area. I'm, the only person in this school probably.
But I feel like now it's like becoming more like an idea of it being like a mixed culture of things. Like when you say American, like you can be referring to like anything.
Hi, I'm Zach Campbell, and I'm a senior at Salem High School, and I am a Cambodian American.
Alright, I'm Enya Chen. I'm a senior at Salem, and I'm Taiwanese, but born and raised here.
My name's Ty Kalinovic. I'm a senior at Plymouth.
Hi, my name is V. I am a senior at Plymouth.
My name is Nicholas Lozada, and I'm a freshman in the Plymouth-Canton Educational Park. I am of Filipino descent and a first-generation American.
Hi, I'm Avery Recto. I am a sophomore at Plymouth High School, and I identify as a Filipino American.
Hi, my name is Karan Singh. I go to Salem. I'm a senior, and I'm an Indian American.
Hi, my name is Obi Venkat. I'm a senior at Salem. I'm an IB, and I'm planning on going into psychology and environmental sustainability.
I know a fair amount of people who were adopted from that area in the time frame that I was. My parents were going through an adoption agency, so they met tons of people who were trying to adopt from Cambodia.
My parents are both from Taiwan. My dad came when he was in middle school, and my mom came after college. And I'm pretty sure my dad came for like the whole better life in America, and then my mom came after she was in college for just have fun.
I believe my parents came around the 1990s, and they finally decided to settle down around the 2000s. They decided to move there to, I guess, start a new life and get a new job.
I used to live in Chelsea, Michigan, which was kind of a very religious kind of area, so I was very outcast, like, especially with my family adopting and that kind of stuff. There were not a lot of, other minorities there. It was a very white Christian kind of town. And so I am really the only Cambodian person I know.
Probably starting around kindergarten, since it was a Christian school, I was typically the only kid at the time that was Filipino, I think. And it was strange.
It just felt like all eyes were on me at like all times, like, oh, she's different, but that probably wasn't the case. It just felt like that since I knew like I looked so different from everyone. I definitely had a bunch of image issues in middle school, especially with my nose. There's a funny story about that. This kid, his name was Steven, we were talking about how every time I play sports I get hit in the face somehow, and he goes like, oh, is that why your nose is so flat? So I developed like this thing for a while. I knew it didn't help, but I just did it.
No one really said anything about me being the only Filipino kid in my specific grade, but I always had this feeling that they were kind of staring at me differently than everyone else was. To be honest, I probably didn't notice it at the time, but I kind of felt a little bit more different, in a way, almost inhuman, if that makes sense.
I knew from the start I was adopted, right? My parents made sure to tell me that I was adopted, not in a bad way, but more like, hey, just so if anybody asks, you are adopted, you should be proud of that stuff. And it really did help.
My family originated from Vietnam. Both my parents were born there. My mom decided to come here in 1984 because her dad, my grandpa, had been drafted into the Vietnam War, and they didn't know it, but he was sent to the U.S. afterwards, and so after living in the U.S. for a while, he had enough money to bring the rest of my mom and her siblings over. My dad came over in 1975. They fled Vietnam.
My dad is from Canada and my mom's from China, so I'm half Chinese. They both came over looking for jobs, and then they got a job at the same place, and that's how they met each other here in Michigan. Around the house, it's kind of an interesting dynamic because it's like two separate things. Like we see the two different families for different holidays and stuff. Just the food that we eat, it's we have some Chinese food and some like European style food. It's just and even the stuff around our house, paintings and decorations and stuff. It's like a mix of the two.
So I'm first generation Indian American. Both my parents came to the US, I don't know the exact year, but it was a while ago. And they both moved here from Coimbatore, India, where they had lived their entire lives. My dad's job moved him here to the US from India. And also they decided to move here just because, I mean, when you're not from the US is kind of tantalizing because it's this entire myth of like the American dream, the golden opportunities in America. And I mean, part of that is right, and then part of that is just like, it's hard to make it here as an immigrant. My parents had to work really hard to give my brother and me like the opportunities that we do have, so I really appreciate them for that.
My parents decided because they're trying to have children, but I think at some point it kind of became a little complicated, so they're like, well, we want a child, so what's the next best thing? Let's adopt. So they contact an adoption agency and they see my photo and the multiple photos that they have, and they're like, oh, that's the one. That's the boy that we want. And so everything's just history from then. I am very glad that I was the one. I'm very appreciative of everybody else who have been adopted. I believe that adoption is a really good way to go, especially if you want to help people.
It's kind of inspired me to work harder in life because I know that my parents didn't have the greatest life, so I have this kind of advantage that I have a safer childhood. I do appreciate like all their struggles and the hardships that they face for me to live the life that I live today.
Some of the struggles that my parents had to go through when they first came to America was there was a lot of like racism, which is kind of a given, but a lot of subtle racism, like stuff that they didn't expect to get. So like people in my neighborhood not accepting my mom, or my mom and my dad having to assimilate or like forced assimilation, my mom having to stop wearing saris, things like that, like where I know one story that they told me that I particularly that made me think was my older brother. He's 3 years older than me. But when he was in kindergarten, my parents were teaching him Tamil, which is our like mother tongue. It's the language that we speak at home. And then the people at the kindergarten asked him to stop teaching him Tamil because he was confusing all the other kids at their kindergarten. And so they just stopped speaking it entirely for a few years. And so I never learned it. They never taught it to me. And I think that's kind of a loss too, because I am Indian American and I do go to India a lot. So it's kind of a loss that I have to regain that part of my culture for myself.
Like one of the things that I really wish that my family did more is like when we were younger was like to have me and my sister that like learned some Chinese. Just like I think that would have been really cool, like be able to communicate better with my family. And I think especially now that I'm older, like I'm beginning to embrace my Chinese culture more. Like when I was younger, it was definitely like a little bit, I was almost like scared to go around and tell people just because of how like, I don't know, like white it was growing up. But no, I definitely something that like I try to embrace now, and it's something that I like to be more involved in.
My grandma decided to come to the US. She came here alone at first, and she left her kids behind. She came here for the opportunity, and she wanted to be a nurse, and she wanted to like pave the way, and she wanted to set up a home. I never felt super different. I always knew that I looked different, and that people always thought of me as being different from them, but I never felt like I was different.
So my mom and dad are both from a state called Punjab, which is in northern India, borders Pakistan. And my dad's from a village called Chandigarh, and my mom's from a place called Jalandhar. What had happened is they actually got married in India, and then they decided to further their education. And at the time in India, especially for my mom, it wasn't very traditional to educate a woman there, and realistically they wouldn't do as well when it came to like getting a job and making money. So they decided to come here, and they both ended up furthering their education at Wayne State. And I think they just decided on Michigan because Wayne State was actually bringing in a lot of people from India, and so that's what they knew. So they went to some place where they feel most comfortable in a new country. For my parents, for their kids, they really didn't. They kind of wanted us to be like Americanized and not like grow up the same as someone in India. And so for my parents specifically, it played a role when it came to like family gatherings and like when it came to religion and like learning the language of India, for example. But they really, other than that, they tried to keep us as Americanized as possible.
I guess, well, being Filipino also, in a way, I still feel like that even though I was born in Indiana, in the United States, almost all of my family, both my mom and dad's side, were born in the Philippines. And in a way, it kind of feels like I was also kind of still there.
I feel like a lot of it has to do with they already went through everything to get to the United States. And if they like raised us traditionally, like they could have done that in India. And so at that point they realized, oh, we're already here. We may as well have some like American kids or else it's kind of pointless.
I do find a struggle in trying to balance like both the American and Vietnamese life. See, the thing is with my mom's family, like all of her siblings and stuff, their side is very like traditional. Like most of my cousins on that side have like gone to Vietnamese school and go to temple every Sunday and know more Vietnamese than I do. And then my dad's side is very like Americanized. Like most of my cousins are half Vietnamese instead of like full Vietnamese like my mom's side. So when I'm with my mom's family, I'm kind of like too American and I feel like out of place. But then when I'm with my dad's side, I'm like too Vietnamese and like still out of place a little bit. And it's kind of weird.
You don't feel American enough to hang out with the American kids or to fit in, and you don't feel Asian enough to fit in with the Asian kids. So when I go to like Filipino gatherings, I feel out of place. But when I go to American gatherings, I also feel out of place. So I don't know where I am in that spectrum.
Kind of a unique thing. You know, like not a lot of people can say that like they're biracial, I guess, and it's interesting to have like that mix of cultures. I think it's kind of helped me be like appreciative of other cultures because like I've experienced more than one like throughout my life. So it's like it's made me more like open and like yeah, appreciative of other people's culture.
So there's a pressure I felt a lot when I was younger, I would say about middle school, where I was very, very aware that I was Indian. And I think that was a time when I was not so much surrounded by other Indian people. And so it really made me feel like I didn't belong. But I never really communicated that to my parents until like about now when I got into high school and I'm getting older and realizing how many differences people share and how we have to, you know, struggle through those differences and like reconcile them. But I remember my parents telling me about the first time that they got here and just like the looks that they would get for wearing like traditional Indian clothing out in public. And that was just really sad for me that they couldn't express that part of their culture organically here. But it's never like one big thing. It's always tiny little parts in themselves that they've had to sell or cut away to fit in. But I think they've only done that because they're always thinking about me and my brother and what they can do for us if they give themselves away. So it's always kind of sad hearing about those stories, but it just makes me appreciate their struggle more.
In school especially, there's a lot of like stereotypes and like expectations. Like I know that I've like experienced that like other people are like, oh, you're Asian, like you're supposed to be doing like, you know, this good in school, or you're supposed to do this when you grow up. Is like something that unfortunately like a lot of Asian kids have to go through.
Either it makes me feel really annoyed or I try to be like that. Or like, I'm like, oh, so this is how I have to be. So, which isn't true at all.
Yeah, no, I think especially as like a golfer and a drummer, I break a lot of stereotypes when it comes to being Indian, and I really pride myself on that.
I think the model minority myth definitely has roots in like the brain drain in India and other parts of Asia, where a lot of intellectuals and very well educated people came over to the US. And that's kind of all people in America ever saw Indians as, and so they were just kind of like, well, this is an Indian person. Like they're good at math, they're super smart, they're nerdy, and that's pretty much it. It's a very monotonic way to look at any type of person, and I think it was just something based in ignorance. A lot of people who didn't know, a lot of Indians didn't know the amount of diversity that could come from that, just being stuck in their ways and not ever really being educated about the differences between those.
Hard finding a specific place here, you know, because it's like you want to keep your ties like where you're from, but you also like want to immerse yourself in this culture. So you got to find like the right balance, and like there's pressure to go like sway one way or another instead of just finding like a balance of both.
When I was younger, I didn't really like the fact that I was Indian because I felt like it made me so different from everyone else. And now I recognize that's just a part of who I am. It's a part of my family. It's always going to be a part of me. And now that I'm able to embrace that and keep in touch with that side of myself, I think I'm a lot more comfortable with who I am today.
I think that a lot of times when people think about American culture, it's like, you know, like white family, like suburbs. But I feel like now it's like becoming more like an idea of it being like a mixed culture of things. Like when you say American, like you can be referring to like anything because like I want to say like the diversity that's here.
I said yes to doing this because I've never really thought about my heritage and my culture and like analyzed what it's like being a Vietnamese in an American world. And it's just like, it's just kind of an eye-opening thing, and I didn't know, like, kind of like thought about things about myself and like noticed things that I've never noticed before.
For a long time, I've actually been suffering with several conditions. The highlight of it all, I guess, being anxiety and depression. And I wanted to overcome that for a really long time, and I thought that one of the best ways I can do that is to have my voice heard, so that way I can build up more confidence in myself.
I don't know any other person in this school who is Cambodian, and I thought, you know, hey, you know, if we are able to kind of say, you know, there's somebody here who's from that area, who's Cambodian, who's actually like 90% Cambodian, I think that's very cool to put in kind of a film like this.
One of the best things you can do is allow yourself to be who you are. And it sounds very simple and it sounds kind of confusing at the same time, but basically embracing your culture, being proud of who you are no matter what, that never goes away. That pride in who you are really just helps you in the long run.
Don't be rude to people about their ethnicities, and like if you have something to say about how they look, don't. That just hits so hard, especially if it's something you can't change.
First of all, my last name is just pronounced Nguyen. It doesn't look like that, but it is. Also, if you've never tried it, try Vietnamese pho. It's really good.
What's a good place to get pho around here?
There's a place called Pho Lucky. It's in like Livonia-ish.
Okay.